Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Effective Staff Development on Any Budget. My name is Courtney Brown, and I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator from the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I'll be your host and question moderator today. Our presenter this morning is Tiffany Hayes. Tiffany is the Library Development Director from the South Carolina State Library. She received her Master's of Library Science from UNC Chapel Hill and a Master's in English Literature from Northern Illinois University. Prior to joining the State Library team, she was the Library Learning and Innovation Manager at the Cumberland County Public Library in Fayetteville, North Carolina. So just a couple of announcements. To register for other webinars or other trainings available from the Professional Development Office, please see the Indiana State Library's events calendar, which can be found on our website at www.in.gov/library. For a full list of our current in-person training menu, please see our continuing education website. The session is about an hour, so you'll receive one LEU for this presentation. If you're watching an archived recording of this webinar, instructions on how to obtain your LEU are in the video's description on YouTube, where you can also find those instructions on the ISL's continuing education site under LEU policies. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and I'm seeing some familiar names, so that's very nice. I'm glad everyone can be here this morning. I'm here in very sunny Columbia, South Carolina. I hope everyone else is having a great morning. So we're going to be talking about effective staff development. I actually prefer the term staff learning, but whatever works. It's basically the same thing. So I believe you should have received or will receive a PDF of the slides and also a handout. If you'd like to jot some notes, make sure you have paper or a window open for that. If you have questions, put them in chat. I'm happy to answer whatever you have. So let's go ahead and get started. So to start off with, and I see everybody has been typing in chat already, and it's lovely to see where everyone's coming from. So my first question is, are you working only on your own learning, or do you manage other staff learning, or both? And what learning challenges, what learning problems are you looking at right now? What's your hot training topic that you were trying to work on? Got a lot of training people, probably managers. Finding relevant training, yes. So today we're going to talk about defining the problem that you're solving with your training, developing a training that is stepped enough for all of your staff, and also some brain-friendly learning tips to make things a little easier. I love it. Yes, some very, very interesting points in the chat. Thank you. So to start off with, particularly if you're managing other staff training for your department, for your library, how do you know that you have a problem that you need training for? What makes you say, yes, this is a thing that we need? And by problem, I mean anything that requires a solution or a training attached to it. It can even be a nice problem, like we're already doing so well that we want to level up. Or it can be a problem, like our customer service is really getting bad reviews, or we're having problem patron situations that we don't know how to deal with. So how do you know that there's something that you need to train, and identify the ideal solution. And is this a training problem? Does this situation that you're facing require training, or is it something else? So, oh, and I see someone is surveying staff for where their confidence is low. Yes, great idea. Now, sometimes you may have training directed to you by another library staff member, your director. Maybe the director says, you know, I really want us to work on our communication skills. Or you have a new opportunity that has training attached to it. Maybe you've just built a new branch next to a middle school. All of a sudden you're flooded with children every afternoon, and your staff are not used to having such an influx of that age range. Or maybe someone comes to you and says, you know, every time I'm on the desk with this particular person, they keep reflecting the questions back to me instead of answering themselves. What's going on here? So for some of these, I'm highly in favor of not making more work for myself by throwing training at a problem that doesn't need it. So for example, something like your administrative person comes to you and says, you know, timesheets are all over the map. People are making errors on their timesheets. They're not getting them in on time. I'm having trouble getting people's times right. Can you train them to do better on this skill? Okay, that's definitely a problem, but is it something maybe we can automate? Is it something that we can make the form easier to fill out? Is it something that is a procedural situation? Or like the example where one staff member says, you know, I've noticed that Susan here just doesn't ever answer reference questions when I'm on the desk. She keeps handing them off to me. I had that question from a staff member once. I went to the other staff member and said, what's going on? Are you having trouble? Her performance had been very good up to that point for several years. I said, what's going on? She said, this other staff member will get involved in lengthy reference questions or helping people on the computer, and a line is forming at the desk while she's over here spending 20 or 30 minutes with one patron. I need to ask her for help because I'm overwhelmed with the questions that I'm answering, and she's not doing her share of the work. Well, that's a very different problem. Her reference skills weren't bad. The other person's customer flow management skills were maybe not so good. Or it may be a procedural thing. You know, if you're having trouble getting closing procedures every night, well, we keep forgetting to check all the study rooms, and 3 times this year people have gotten locked in the study rooms after closing. Okay, that's maybe you need more training, but maybe you need a checklist to remind them to check every room, or, you know. So things to ask in this situation: is it one person that's having a problem? Is it one location? Did it just start with a particular technology? Ever since we've got this new catalog system, this particular department is having a problem with it. Okay, is it them or is it the technology? Were they doing it fine before? How frequently does this come up? Our staff members have a terrible time doing timesheets that reflect inclement weather closing things. It's South Carolina. We get inclement weather like once every 3 years. That's more of a procedural thing than a training thing. So sometimes you need a different solution. And one example that I find interesting, and I'll come back to this probably later in the presentation, is at my previous library system, we would frequently get new services, programs, databases, fun things, and our director would very excitedly promote them to board of trustees or whoever she was talking to. Those people would come to the library and the staff members either didn't know anything about the program that we had just added, or they had heard about it, but they couldn't use it. So she said, we need training solutions for this. We need to, every time we add something, just go out and train. This was previous to webinars, so it would have required a lot of in-person, face-to-face training. The time commitment would have been a problem. So I said, I think we have a different solution here. So we first said, okay, here's an information sheet for all of the managers with a checklist, and have your staff sign off. You can present it however you want, as long as you present it. It's their responsibility to find out about these new things. And then we incentivized and said, if you promote the new thing, you can put your name in a drawing for a gift card. That actually worked really well, and I'll come back to that later. But it was partially training and partially just people don't read emails. You know, you can't send something out and assume that they're going to read it. So defining the problem. I know a lot of my training colleagues here are probably familiar with this, but I think it bears repeating. Say you want to improve customer service. What does that mean exactly? Your director says, let's work on our customer service this year. We want to focus on this. What exactly does that mean? What does the outcome look like? What does the problem look like? Does it mean that you've noticed that some staff members are not treating some patrons respectfully? In that case, what exactly does that look like? Can you define courteous customer service and train that? Or maybe you've just had a lot of customer complaints lately. Okay, so you want to reduce patron complaints. This is a good time to take some sort of a survey of what exactly their problem seems to be. Maybe it's that you've changed your website and they can't find the information they need. Okay. Do staff know how to help them with that? Do you need different technology? Or maybe it's staff reporting negative interactions with patrons. Okay, is that a workflow thing or a training thing? Perhaps you have a very difficult patron group to reach. Okay, the teens are very loud and disruptive and you're having trouble wrangling them. Maybe they need their own space. Maybe this is a space and programming issue rather than a training issue. So once you've narrowed it down, we want to break things down into small, tiny steps. And in my experience, people, especially people who don't train very often or are usually working with people that have about the same level of experience as they do, don't break their training down into as small of steps as they might. So the idea here is, imagine a ladder. You're at the bottom of the ladder and your training goal is up here at the top. And the rungs are 6 feet apart. That's not going to be a very effective ladder. It's going to be very hard to get your staff to go where you want them to go on that particular ladder. So what you want to do is make the rungs closer together. Better yet, make it a nice stair step or a ramp so you can get everybody where they need to go easier. Now it's going to take more work and it's going to take longer, but it's also going to be more effective. So for those who are not familiar with these, and I did see that we have several specifically training people who are probably well familiar, but again, if you're not familiar with the knowledge, skills, or attitudes, knowledge is what the learner needs to know. Skills are what actions or behaviors you're looking to perform. And the attitude is the learner's feeling toward the task or toward the learning process, but it's also their gut level understanding of that kind of that aha moment. For example, if you have a customer service training, staff may know that there's certain behaviors that are very customer friendly, like greeting them as they come in the door or checking back with them to make sure that they've found everything. Their behavior may be a little different. They may forget to do some of those things. They may be distracted by other things or not habitually doing the behaviors, even though they know that they're good practice. There may be an attitude component, and everyone thinks, people may have bad attitudes toward the patron. It may even just be something like they need the aha moment of, look how much better this approach works than what I've been doing. Look how it feels to me when I am in a successful interaction. The other thing here is if you have a list of skills, cross out everything that isn't strictly necessary. It can be something like, I have a 2-hour class to teach this group of people how to use Excel to track their programming statistics. Okay, they don't need to know everything about Excel. They just need to know how to sort and add numbers, So don't make your work harder. And a note about learning, I do try and put some learning brain science kind of things or learning philosophy kind of things. The 4 steps of learning, it's helpful to recognize those. The first step is unconscious incompetence. The staff may think they're doing a great job at something, but they don't know that there's something that they're not doing correctly or at all. Conscious incompetence, they may have the knowledge, but they don't have the skills. They know that there's something they should be doing, but they don't have it in their habit behaviors yet. Conscious competence, the learner can do the task if they're thinking about it, but as soon as they think about something else, it goes away. So it's not in their muscle memory or their autopilot yet. This is really important because we spend a lot of time on autopilot. So if you have to think about a skill in order to do it, it's going to be very hard for those staff members to do it consistently. And finally, unconscious competence. Task is on autopilot. It's not taking up processing space. This is to the point at which they can perhaps add a different skill or add a task. So, for example, in breaking skills down here, if you say, we want to work on our presentation skills. We want staff to feel more comfortable presenting things to conferences or other places. These are all very good things, but each of these things can be broken down into multiple other tiny skills. For example, if you're teaching how to use a PowerPoint, that's very one small corner of presenting a topic, but it also in it has several steps. You may be, learning how to edit text or paste images or open a slideshow. So when you're planning on this, the more you can break it down into tiny steps, the better success you will be. But unfortunately, that does slow it down. Those of you who teach computer classes, especially to beginners, like the Patron training, technology training classes, you've probably noticed this. You'll go into a learning how to use your email class, and the first thing that Patron does is, how do I use the mouse? And then it's half an hour using the mouse before you get to the email. So be aware of where your staff are coming from in terms of their starting point and things that they already are able to accomplish easily, and what their skill level is. What questions do we have so far as we're going through breaking this down?
I don't see any questions yet.
Okay, I had not seen any, but just checking. Thank you. Okay, so think about how you learn. This is an important thing, and I think sometimes organizations are not learning friendly. We don't set things up to be successful, or we have learning challenges that need to be managed on a more structural organizational level. But it's also the case of, we want to look at our own learning and see what works for us as well. And I call this how to make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. That actually comes from training animals, honestly. It's like, I want to teach the cat not to knock things off the dresser in the middle of the night. I could wake up at 4 a.m. and move him out of the room every time he knocks things off the dresser, or I could just not put things on the dresser for him to knock off. So a lot of learning is, as I said, finding out where our autopilot moments are and disrupting that and changing the behavior from there. So it may be the part of making the right thing easy, of stepping things up correctly so that staff learn incrementally and are confident in their learning. But it might be making the incorrect thing harder. Like if you have a library card application and the staff consistently forget to check this person is an out of district member and has to pay a fee box on the application, make it a required question. Don't let them proceed until they say yes or no. Use technology, use procedures and structures. To some extent, the more we can not have to integrate into autopilot and think about, the easier it is. So my suggestion to learning is only learn the things you need to learn. So what we want to have happen is our learners seek out information, understand it, retain it, and use it. So things that make learning easier are things like context. Like if you've ever been learning something and the instructor says, well, just do it this way. Trust me, just do it this way. It's much easier if they say, it may seem like you want to do it this other way, but that's going to create problems 3 steps down the line, or that's going to not allow you to do this other option. A little context goes a long way. Some things that make learning harder that we tend to be a little challenged with organizationally is distraction or stress, not understanding the big picture, If you have to learn while being on the service desk, that makes it much more difficult to integrate things. You're in and out of your learning a lot. Changing things quickly. Organizations, we don't tend to be able to change very quickly, and that's a hard thing for most staff to do. One other thing that I like to point out, because the past couple of years have been very stressful for most people, is that most people don't learn well when they're under stress. In fact, having a very strong fear response to something makes the thinking part of the brain shut off. So if you've noticed yourself or your staff members, especially in the past couple of years, not being able to pay as much attention, not retaining things as well, not thinking through things, not learning as quickly or as enthusiastically, they're probably under a lot of stress. Our processing capabilities can only take so many things. If we're thinking about new procedures for the pandemic and whether are requiring masks or not, or things of this nature, it's going to be much harder to get them to learn some other new thing that you're teaching them. So not to say we don't have to learn during a pandemic, but the more stress and fear you have with your learners, the more difficult your task is going to be. Also, I hate to break it to you, but learning styles that we've all discussed are not really a thing. Has everybody done those quizzes in trainings where you pick whether you're a visual or a kinesthetic or an audio learner? Yes. That's not as helpful. Yes. That's not as helpful as one would think. And it actually has very little context or framework scientifically. So for example, if you were going in for a surgery and the doctor said, well, I'm an audio learner, so I recorded all of my medical lectures and listened to them repeatedly, and that's how I learned how to do surgery, would you feel very confident with this person? Probably not. So instead, think about interaction, structure, and context. The interaction is the level of engagement or processing that the learner has with the material. So listening to a lecture is a very low engagement. You're not really touching the material at all. You're not handling it or processing it. Something like role playing is very interactive because you're in the moment, you're using it. Something like giving the learner a topic to teach to other learners, also very interactive and engaging because they have to have a very strong grasp on it in order to transmit it to others. So the more interactive you can make something, the more it sticks with the learner. Structure, likewise structure. If you think about structure is with the information, like imagine doing a puzzle without looking at the picture on the box. You don't have a framework for what it's supposed to look like. You don't have any understanding of what you're working on. The structure kind of gives the learner places to hang things that are connected to things they already know. It gives them a framework or a point of reference. And context is where it fits with what they already know and what they're working on. So if, for example, if you have a new staff member, this is also a very common thing. You're onboarding your staff member and you sit them down and say, here's the procedures manual, read it through so that you know all of our procedures. That's very hard to learn because no context. If you give them an example and say, here's a scenario that may happen, look at the procedures manual, find the points that are relevant to this scenario, and tell me how you would handle it and what the correct response is. That gives a context, that gives some sort of a framework for them to understand the material. So some ways to incorporate some more brain-friendly learning is, for one thing, storytelling. It has all those three elements: interaction, structure, and context. It allows for there to be nuance and decision making in the process. It gives the full picture. It's not just a checklist, for example. This second one, that looks a little cryptic, the rider and the elephant. If you picture the thinking, logical, decision-making brain as the rider on top of the elephant, and the elephant is the learner's unconscious, autopilot, emotional brain. The rider is the one making the decisions where to go and is theoretically in charge. But they're only in charge until the elephant decides that this isn't working and it would like to go do something else. So force of will from the rider, the logical side, is not sufficient to keep the elephant, the reactive, instinctive, emotional side, on track. In general, if your learning relies on memory or logical response or motivation, pure memory and pure motivation are very unreliable in humans. They're only going to get you so far until the elephant takes over and says, you know, we're going the path we've always gone. We're doing the thing that makes the most sense to us. We're taking the path of least resistance. So you have to find ways of getting that elephant on board. We like to believe that we're purely logical and we can sit down and have motivation and say, I am going to learn this. I am going to teach it to my staff. We're all going to be on board. But that's not the way our brains work. Now, this next one, recall versus recognition. You've all seen this, but you may not know that this is what it is. If you've been studying for a test and you get to the exam and you can see the information, you remember where in the textbook it was on that lower right corner with the picture. You can picture it in your mind, but you don't remember it. That's recognition. You know it when you see it, but you can't recall it. Recall would be something like, list all of the steps to this procedure in order from memory. Recognition would be, here are the steps, put them in the correct order. Sometimes one is appropriate and sometimes the other is. For example, if you want to have a series of steps for dealing with a patron who is escalating a situation, you don't want to stop and grab your checklist. You want things to be automatic. You want there to be complete recall. That's not a situation where you would want to rely on external aids any more than absolutely necessary. However, if you're doing something like a closing procedure and you want to make sure everything is correct, that's a great time to do recognition. It's similar to, studies have shown that surgeons do better after surgery if they have a checklist. So, you know, they don't operate on the wrong body part or stitch up the scalpel inside the patient. You would think that's very obvious, but in fact, a checklist supports the learner's memory you don't have to rely just on the memory itself. So recognize for your staff and for yourself when it's important to have the recall and when recognition with some job aids is really a better way. We talked a little bit just a minute ago also about autopilot and muscle memory. A couple of these things in terms of learning, we all have things that are procedural memory or autopilot, things that we know the steps to so well that we don't have to think about this. This is a great way to do tasks because it's very efficient brain-wise. We can just have things flowing and our brains can be working on something else. Like if you drove to work today and it's your normal route to work and you were thinking about the meeting that you're having this afternoon or the project you're working on, that's a very good procedural memory. You arrived at work without thinking about it. But first of all, it's very, very hard to change procedural memory once your staff has it. You have to interrupt it and replace it with something else. And during the process of replacing that procedural memory with a different procedure, your speed and efficiency of tasks are going to decrease a lot. And they're also going to decrease for things that are related but not the procedure, because if you're autopilot doing the morning check-in, the materials procedure, while also dealing with something else, and you have to all of a sudden focus very deeply on that check-in procedure that once was in autopilot, the something else is also going to suffer because you can't think of two things at once. So a lot of organizations are very concerned. Well, it seems like we're slowing down or they don't seem to understand it. We're making a lot of errors. Yeah, that's the learning process as well. And that's a very difficult thing to address. The other thing about autopilot is it's very common for us to say, well, the new staff, let this person train the new staff. She's been doing this procedure for years. She knows exactly how it's supposed to be done. That person probably knows how it's done so well that she doesn't know that there are certain steps that she's taking. So it's very difficult for the new person to learn because this other person is probably doing things that she'll forget to mention just because they're so habitual that it just happens. So that's a great use of training, but it's also very difficult to control, and you kind of have to account for it. So urgency and accountability. This is an interesting thing. The example for this is at a previous library, we got a subscription to, it was that Lynda database before it was LinkedIn Learning, for technology training. And everyone was so excited. Oh, we're going to learn how to do all these fancy technology things. The staff were very eager to use it. It was seen as a great benefit. We checked the stats a year later, almost nobody had used it. Because open-ended learning is very difficult. If you don't have that end result, if you don't have the top of that learning ladder to get to, and it's just a learn whatever you want about this, it's very difficult for most people to keep on task. So if you want to create some urgency in your learning, have it be on a deadline. Say, oh, I'd really love to brush up on my Spanish language skills so that I can do this bilingual outreach to this new community center. Okay, set a date 3 months in the future. We're going to do an outreach in July for summer reading, and we're going to read a bilingual story time at this outreach. I better start preparing now. So the more accountability and urgency you create for yourself, the more most people are able to learn and have a time frame for their learning. Some things that don't work that we try to make work, or they may work in some cases, but not in others. Competition between staff, like whoever does these skills the best or reaches this milestone first wins a gift card, a prize, whatever that may work for some things and it may work for some staff. It does not work for everything. And if you competitionize, that's not a word. If everything's a competition, then nothing is, and it falls by the wayside. Rewards, in terms of creating urgency, rewards kind of are a double-edged sword. Some staff are all about the go to this many trainings, get a certificate or a gift card or a whatever. And some staff are just like, let me do my job. I don't care about that. It also can come out as very patronizing, like, if there's already low morale and you're boosting morale by giving a gift card or whatever the external reward is, it makes some staff feel like they're not being taken seriously. The interesting thing about this, I had mentioned earlier that we had in my previous library, a training problem of making sure everybody on staff knew of all of the new services and resources that we continually acquired and the things that we were trying to promote. So we had a promotional, okay, if you promote the new service, you can put in a ticket for a gift card. And we have a drawing and there were prizes. We evaluated that service a couple of times, and in retrospect, I really wish I had written a paper about it or something, because every time we evaluated how staff felt about that program, and it was very successful, our number of staff referring patrons to new services and telling them about new products or new opportunities or programs or whatever increased greatly. It increased dramatically. Our stats went way up. It was very successful from that standpoint. But when we asked the staff about it, half of them said, yes, we love putting the tickets in for the gift cards. We love the chance to get a reward. It's a great extra. It's very motivating for me. I will definitely keep doing these promotions so that I can get my gift card rewards. The other half of the staff couldn't have cared less. Some of them actively disliked it. They said, why are you paying us extra small things for doing our job? This is not a thing that I need or use. I'm doing this anyway. I would do this even if you didn't. It was very strange to see that it divided almost in half every single time we asked. So just a note about that, and keep that in mind. That was a very limited sample size, but there you go. This next one, punitive training, I call it that because I'm sure you've seen this a number of times where you're trying to solve a staff problem by throwing training at it. Like, this staff member is very burned out and unpleasant to the patrons, and they need customer service training because they've been very rude at the service desk. Or we overheard these two staff members saying some very racially insensitive things in front of patrons. They need to go to EDI training so that they understand diversity better. I don't like using training as a punishment, and it feels like it's not in good faith and you're not addressing the actual problem. So you see this also sometimes with the mandatory HR training, hostile workplace harassment, that sort of thing, of we told you so that we can say that we told you. That does not affect a staff member's learning. It doesn't make them understand it better. There is, as I said, it's not in good faith. It's punitive. It's not very supporting of learning. It's sometimes necessary, but it's coming from a place of not a very good learning environment. This next one here, reflective demonstration, and I will say that I've only heard this particular term in terms of very specific learning. This is what we frequently see with, if you're teaching technology to somebody and you're saying, here's how to do something, and walking them through the steps. Here, click here first, then go to this button and click there. Then go to this and type in this. And you're walking them through step by step. That is deceptively low on that interaction scale because it's not engaging the learner in problem solving. And it does something with those skills that they need. We're introducing the skill without teaching the skill. And so you think that you have taught the skill because the learner has clicked in the appropriate place. They have typed in the appropriate thing. They have done all the steps, but they have not engaged in any kind of problem solving around the skill. They have not corrected their mistakes. They have not explored anything. The question here is, do you want them to follow the directions exactly, or do you want them to figure it out? And in most cases, it is better for the learner to make a mistake and then correct the mistake, even if it takes longer, than it is to just follow the rote instructions. Because if something goes wrong with the rote instructions, they don't have a way to come back from that. It doesn't generate confidence in the learner if they are only working off the script and don't know how to problem solve the situation. Similarly, on this next one, avoiding failure, it's kind of two sides of the same coin. Either we don't let our learners fail and correct it, or we think, well, we want them to learn and problem solve, so we're not going to give them enough context not to fail. The example I'll use here is, there was a story going around social media several months ago about this parent who was trying to instill independence and problem solving in their young child. And he said, well, the child was hungry and was wanting to open up a can of beans for lunch. And the dad said, okay, well, here's the can opener. Go ahead and open, and you can have some lunch. And the child didn't know how to use the can opener. And this went on for several hours, with the child getting hungrier and more frustrated, and the father not providing any other guidance except, well, you put the can opener on the can. And so this area between cannot let them fail, cannot trust their judgment enough to recover from failure, versus not going to give them enough context not to fail. Either way is very demoralizing for the learner and leads to them losing confidence in themselves. So finding the middle ground there in learning is very important. And finally, this info dumping. This goes back to the stepability of the training, the climbing the ladder to the goal. You want a bunch of little steps toward your learning goal, but you don't want all the steps. If you're teaching them to this goal, you don't need to give them all the information. They're not going to be climbing the ladder to eternity. They at some point have to stop, integrate, process, use the material, let it sink in. There is not infinite learning at one time. Okay, and we are reaching about the end of time and also about the end of content. I'm not seeing any specific questions. I think this was perhaps abstract rather than specific to a particular training topic. So if anyone has a specific problem or question, I'm happy to address that, whether directly related to this information or whether it's just, here's a training problem we're having, I'm not sure how to deal with it.
Okay, if you have any questions for Tiffany, go ahead and put those in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and put in that form. If you need an LEU certificate, please fill out that form. Just a reminder, if you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to find how to get your LEU or in the information in YouTube, where you can also find that on the continuing education site under LEU policies. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for presenting for us. If you guys have any questions for Tiffany, please again put that in the chat. Looks like her email address is there as well. I will get the recording and the handouts that she provided to you later this week. We will go ahead and hang out and see if there are any more questions, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.